Hey guys, welcome back. Hope you all are doing well. This is Mohammad Badruddin, and today we are going to talk about the Active Directory penetration testing roadmap or pathway. So before going to explain each phases, I just want you to see the pathway. So here we have 6 steps. In different images or in different platforms, you will find 7 steps, maybe 10 steps, maybe 5 steps. So less and more, no problem, but you must have a mindset with these steps that you need to go in this flow. Fine. So the first phase is information gathering. We call it the ghost phase because in this phase you will try, or a penetration tester or an attacker will try to gather as much information as possible about the target organization. Fine. The second step is initial attack and foothold. So after gathering all the information about the organization, its employees, what platforms they are using, what kind of softwares they are using, what is published over public interface or public network. So on behalf of that information, you try to get access into the environment, internal environment. So in this phase, the attacker get initial foothold into the internal environment. Now, once you get the access to the internal environment, the third step comes into the picture, which is post-exploitation enumeration, and this we call it mapping the kingdom. So once you get into the internal network, you will again go to the information gathering phase, okay, because you need to know the high value targets inside the network, what users are there, what access control list are there, what kind of resources are there, what kind of services are there, and on behalf of that you will try to find the vulnerabilities in those particular information what you collected. So after this, once you have all the information about the internal network, then you will go for the privilege escalation or lateral movement, and this phase is known as the climb. So maybe once you get into the network, you may have a standard user, okay, you have only privileges as the standard user or low level, low privilege user. Now you need to escalate your privilege to the higher privileged users so that you have the ability to access more resources, more services in the network, and more information in the network. So basically it is a war of information, and information is everything for any organization. Fine. So the fourth step is privilege escalation and lateral movement. The fifth step is full domain compromise. Now once you get more privileges, you are going more near or more closer to the full domain compromise, which is the checkmate phase. Okay, and once you compromise the domain, you will go for the persistence, because you don't want to exfiltrate all the information, everything in just one click. You may have to spend a lot of time, and the advanced persistent threats, they basically get into the organization, they stay there for 1 year, 6 months, and slowly they exfiltrate all the information about the organization. They don't do it in one day, because the organization may have DLP, the organization may have EDR, XDR, different kind of defense mechanisms are there. So they need to analyze everything closely, and slowly they do the things, okay, they exfiltrate everything. So for that purpose, if you want to stay in a network for a long time, you need persistence, okay, so that whenever you want to access the internal network, you can go into it and access everything. Fine. So these are the 6 phases. One more thing which is important, a lot of time what we do, we make persistence just after the initial foothold. So you may get the initial foothold and you do not compromise the whole domain. You are still in the fourth phase, or you are still in the third phase, okay, because it is a long process. So you may need to access the network after a break, or maybe the shell you get is not perfect, okay, or is not stable. So you may lose your initial foothold. So just after initial foothold, penetration testers or hackers, they do the persistence. So whatever privileges you have as the initial foothold. Once you establish the persistence, and whenever you get into the network after disconnection, you get the same privileges after the access you get. Okay, so that's it for this. Let's go to the phase explanation. So the first phase is information gathering and recon. So as I mentioned earlier, that the attackers map the target environment from external or unauthenticated perspective without triggering any alert, and they do it by network mapping, passive enumeration. There are two type of enumeration, active and passive. In active enumeration, you basically engage with the victim, okay, or victim resources to gather the information. In passive enumeration, you basically do not let the victim know that someone is trying to access things. Okay, open source intelligence, this is the huge part. Okay, so what attackers do, they scrap the LinkedIn profiles for employee names to build the username list, searching public GitHub repositories for accidentally committed credentials or hard-coded credentials, and footprinting external facing infrastructures like VPN portals or OWA websites or web application that is public facing. Okay, and DNS interrogation. Fine. So before a single packet touches the internal network, the attacker maps the target from the outside, and they look for the weakest link without tripping any alert. So this is the information gathering and reconnaissance phase. Basically, when we talk about the penetration testing, I need to tell you at this point in this phase so that you are not confused about it. Internal penetration testing is different from the external penetration testing. So in the future videos, what we will do the internal penetration testing. We will set up the labs. We will see how the vulnerability arises. Okay, we deliberately misconfigure things so that it is vulnerable, and then we will see how we can exploit it. So all these things basically comes into the internal penetration testing, but what we just talk about this phase, that belongs to the external penetration testing, when someone outside of the organization do the information gathering and try to get initial foothold. Fine. Next phase is phase 2, which is initial foothold. So this is where the attacker crosses the boundary from an external threat to an internal authenticated presence. Okay, so this is the transaction phase, as you can see, from an unauthenticated outsider to gaining authorized access or executing code to the network to get inside. Okay, and key activities in this phase what attacker perform is authentication attacks, exploitation of external services, protocol poisoning, phishing, or social engineering. Fine. So executing slow and low password sprays against the OWA portals or web applications, sending targeted phishing emails with malicious payloads, or exploiting a zero-day vulnerability in an edge firewall. So these are the few activities that attackers perform for the initial foothold. Fine, to get into the internal environment. Now the third phase is post-exploitation enumeration. So once you get into the network or internal environment, the attacker will analyze the internal Active Directory structure to identify paths, privileges, and high value targets. And for that purpose, what activity they perform, they basically go for the LDAP queries for domain mapping, identifying high value targets. So once they do the LDAP mapping, okay, or domain mapping through the LDAP, they find what services are there, what kind of servers are there, what kind of users are there, okay, what kind of groups are there. So it's easy for you to identify the high value targets at that moment. The third activity what they perform is auditing permissions like ACLs and ACEs. And the fourth is internal share hunting. So in Active Directory environment, file share server is very normal part of the environment. So attackers will try to find out what kind of shares are there and try to hunt the shares. Okay, so as the attacker is inside, now they need to figure out where they landed and where the crown jewels are, means the high value target. And this is the intelligence gathering phase inside the network. So what attacker basically do in this phase, using tools like Bloodhound to map Active Directory access control list and group membership, querying LDAP to find vulnerable certificate templates like ESC 1, 2, 3, 4, misconfigured group policy objects or servers with missing patches. Okay, so this is what attackers do in this phase. The next phase is going to be the privilege escalation and lateral movement. Now this phase is important because once you get the initial foothold as a normal user or a standard user, it has limited privileges. Okay, you cannot do the elevated or privileged task. You cannot perform the privileged task with that standard or low privileged users. So you need to elevate your privileges so that you can perform or you can access more resources in the network. Fine. So what attackers do, they uses the map they just built in the previous step or previous phase to move towards their target, and upgrading their permissions along the way. They jump from machine to machine hunting for highly privileged sessions. Okay, and it could be due to forging certificates via Active Directory certificate services to instantly become domain admin, executing curb roasting to crack service account hashes, or using the pass the hash, pass the ticket and WMI to jump onto a server where a tier 0 administrator left a disconnected session. Okay, the phase 4. Now we come to the phase 5, and this is full domain compromise. Fine. So in this phase, the attacker has required the tier 0 credentials. Okay, and the entire Active Directory forest and everything that relies on it for authentication and falls under their control. So they can do it by executing a desync attack to replicate the entire ntds.did database. So ntds.did database, this is basically the database of Active Directory which contains all the hashes, all the users, all the resources, their permissions and everything. Okay, so compromise the domain controller, exfiltrate the ntds.did database by performing maybe the desync attack or something. So we will see all of these things in the coming future videos. Fine. So the last step is persistence. So the persistence comes into the picture when we get initial access or initial foothold or the full domain compromise. We don't want to lose the access to the target organization, because maybe when we get the initial foothold, okay, we get the initial foothold as a low level user, and maybe after 1 week that employee is fired from the organization and the account is disabled or deleted. So at that instance, how we can get into the organization, because the account is already disabled, you lost control over the organization, over the target. So at that instance, even after initial foothold, persistence is important. And once you completely compromise the domain, even after that, persistence is important. So embedding covert access mechanism to ensure long-term control even if the initial breach is discovered. So the attacker knows the blue team will eventually notice the breach before the alarms go off. So they embed deep cryptographic backdoors so they can easily re-enter the network even after passwords are reset. Fine. So what they do, they minting golden tickets using the stolen curb TGT hash. In coming videos, you will understand and you will see curb TGT and what that curb TGT do. Okay, so basically its hash is very important. If you get the hash of curb TGT, you get most of the things. Okay, so they set up the shadow credentials on critical accounts or forging highly privileged Active Directory certificate services certificates with a 10 years expiration date. Okay, so ticket manipulation, which is golden ticket, silver ticket, backdooring Active Directory objects, skeleton keys, and malicious group policy objects. These are the few things, few activities that you can perform for getting the persistence. Okay, so that's it for this video. We see the phases of penetration testing of Active Directory. In coming videos, we are going to set up the labs and we will get our hand dirty. So that's it for this video. If you like the content, please like, subscribe, and share. Join the Discord channel and join the membership so you get the advanced level labs. Okay, and I'm gonna see you in the next video. Bye.